The first scream didn't come from the little girl. It came from her mother, sharp enough to cut through the plaza's chatter like glass. Under blinking holiday lights, the small town square looked harmless. A fountain rattling winter-cold water, a popcorn cart steaming, families drifting between stalls as a thin drizzle slicked the brick. The air carried cinnamon, coffee, and rain. Near the fountain, a little girl in a blue sweater clutched a paper cup of cocoa. Shoulders hunched against the wind, her small boots planted beside her mother's legs as if she could anchor herself there. Her mother kept one hand on the girl's hood and the other on a tote bag held too tight. Knuckles pale, eyes scanning faces like she was counting exits in a room that wasn't supposed to be dangerous. Then the K9 appeared. German Shepherd. Dark saddle coat shining with rain, harness-stamped police, moving with the smooth certainty of a creature trained to read the world in invisible ink. At the other end of the lead, the handler walked with measured steps, shoulders squared, gaze steady, the kind of calm that made people unconsciously step aside. The dog's head turned, nostrils flaring once, twice, and the whole animal changed. It wasn't a lunge yet. It was stillness. A tight, coiled pause that made every hair along its spine rise like a warning sign. One heartbeat later, the dog cut across the open space and closed its jaws. Not on skin, not on flesh, but on the back of the girl's jacket near the collar seam. The cocoa cup slipped, tipped, and hit the brick with a wet slap. The girl stumbled, eyes wide, breath sucked in, and the dog pulled with relentless precision, dragging her backward in a straight line, as if following a map only it could see. People gasped. Someone shouted. A stroller wheel squealed as it jerked aside. The mother surged forward, panic breaking her composure in an instant. "Let her go! Let her go!" she screamed, voice cracking as she lunged for her daughter's sleeve. The handler's command snapped across the square, short, hard syllables meant for a battlefield, not a holiday market. "Back, ma'am, back!" His hand flashed to the leash, not yanking the dog off, but guiding, positioning, controlling the chaos. The K9 didn't bark. It didn't growl. It just kept pulling, placing its body between the girl and the woman, with a stubborn, professional insistence that made no sense to anyone watching. Phones rose, lenses catching the mother's terror and the dog's unwavering focus. From a doorway, a shop chime jingled as someone stepped out, then froze when they saw the handler's face. Grave, apologetic, like he'd recognized something no one else could. The girl's boots scraped over the bricks. Her mother's fingers missed by inches. And in that frozen second, between a child's frightened gasp and a crowd's rising outrage, the question landed like thunder under the holiday lights. Why would a trained police dog drag a little girl away from her own mother? Morning had started gently, the kind that tried hard to convince you the world was still safe if you didn't look too closely. A low gray sky hung over the town like a wool blanket, muting sound and color, while the bakery on the corner pushed warm air scented with yeast and sugar out onto the sidewalk every time its door opened. Holiday lights were still strung above the plaza, blinking lazily even though the season had passed. Their soft glow reflected in damp bricks from last night's rain. The little girl walked beside her mother, small hand tucked into a coat pocket, blue sweater peeking out at the cuffs and collar, her steps careful as if she didn't want to splash in the shallow puddles lining the street. She was quiet in the way observant children often are. Not withdrawn, just watching. Eyes moving from window displays to pigeons hopping near the fountain, to the faces of adults rushing past with their own worries folded tight inside them. Her mother looked older than she probably was, shoulders set forward from carrying too much for too long, one hand always hovering close to the girl's back like a silent promise she wouldn't let go. She smiled when the girl tugged her toward the bakery window, nodded when asked for a pastry they couldn't quite afford, and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face, with a tenderness that bordered on urgency, as if she was trying to pack a lifetime of reassurance into a single morning. Across the plaza, the police K-9 team made their usual circuit, so familiar that most people barely registered them anymore. The handler walked at an easy pace, coffee steaming in one hand, leash looped loosely around his wrist, his posture relaxed but alert in a way that never really turned off. The dog moved beside him like a shadow with purpose, head level, tail low, eyes constantly sampling the environment, not curious so much as attentive, as if the town itself were speaking in a language it understood fluently. Kids waved. Shop owners nodded. Someone called out the dog's name with a laugh, and the handler raised 2 fingers in acknowledgement without breaking stride. To the town, they were background music. Steady, reassuring, predictable. But the little girl noticed the things adults didn't. As they crossed the plaza, she slowed, gaze snagging on a dark sedan parked along the curb near the hardware store, its engine off, windows tinted just enough to reflect the blinking lights overhead. It had been there yesterday, and the day before that. She tugged her mother's sleeve and tilted her head toward it, brow furrowed. "That car," she said softly, not accusing, just curious. Her mother followed her gaze, eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second, before she forced a smile and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Lots of cars, sweetheart," she replied, a little too quickly, steering her away toward the fountain. The girl let herself be guided, but she looked back once more, noting how the sedan didn't move, how no one got in or out, how it seemed to be waiting. Nearby, the K-9 lifted its head and drew a deeper breath, ears angling forward almost imperceptibly before settling again, and the handler slowed just enough to scan the square. Nothing happened. Laughter drifted from the bakery. Lights blinked. The morning held its calm. But beneath the smell of sugar and wet stone, something was already out of place, and the girl felt it even if she couldn't yet name it. The plaza had been calm right up until it wasn't. And when the moment replayed later, the handler would remember the smallest details first. The drizzle beating on the K-9's whiskers, the holiday lights blinking like nothing could ever change, the cocoa smell drifting from the bakery door. He and the dog angled through the crowd in their usual loop, a familiar sight that made people relax without realizing it. The K-9 moved steady at his left knee, harness snug, paws quiet on wet brick, eyes sampling faces, hands, pockets, and the invisible currents between them. The little girl stood near the fountain in her blue sweater, half hidden by her mother's coat, one mittened hand wrapped around a paper cup as steam curled into the gray air. Her mother's posture was protective but strained, like a wire pulled too tight. She kept one arm around the girl, while the other clutched a tote bag high against her side. At first, the dog's attention flicked past them, the way it did everything else. One look, one breath, then onward. Then something changed. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. The K-9's head lifted a fraction. The ears pricked forward. The tail lowered, not in fear, but in focus. A stillness settled over the dog's body, sudden and complete, like a switch thrown in the dark. The handler felt it through the leash before he fully saw it, the way the line went from loose to alive in his hand. The dog wasn't staring at the girl. It was staring at the mother's midsection, at the tote bag and the fold of her coat where fabric bunched near her ribs. The K-9 inhaled again, deeper, sharper, then angled its muzzle as if triangulating a point in space. The handler's eyes followed, cataloging what looked normal to everyone else. A tired woman, a child, a bag. But the dog's fixation wasn't opinion. It was information. The K9 stepped closer, not lunging, just closing distance with surgical certainty. The mother noticed and stiffened, her grip tightening on the tote as if to hide it inside her own bones. The girl, oblivious for half a second, lifted her cocoa for a sip. Then the dog moved. It slipped through the narrow gap between people with a speed that felt impossible in a crowd. And instead of snapping at the mother or barking an alert, it went for the child's jacket collar seam, a controlled grip designed to move without tearing. In one smooth pull, the K9 dragged the girl backward and sideways, away from the mother's body, positioning itself like a living shield between them. Cocoa splashed and the cup tumbled, rolling in a thin brown arc across the bricks. The girl stumbled, startled, but not bitten, not hurt, just displaced, extracted. The crowd erupted in gasps and shouted questions. The mother screamed, reaching, fingers grasping for her daughter's sleeve, panic flashing across her face like a mask she couldn't keep on straight. "Let her go," she cried, voice raw. The handler's command cracked across the plaza, short and hard, meant to cut through chaos. "Back, ma'am, stop!" He didn't yank the dog off. He moved with it, stepping in, body angled to block, eyes locked on the mother's hands and the bag pressed to her side. The K9 didn't bark. It didn't play tug of war. It held and pulled and then planted its paws, braced, creating space where the dog insisted space had to exist. For a heartbeat, everything slowed. The blinking lights, the rain, the mother's breath hitching, the girl's wide eyes. And then a sound threaded through the noise, so faint most people missed it. A tiny electronic chirp, like a swallowed alarm, coming from somewhere near the mother's coat before abruptly cutting out. The K9's muscles tightened as if that whisper of sound confirmed what its nose already knew, and the handler's face hardened with a realization he didn't have time to explain. Because the only question that mattered now was this: what scent or signal had just flipped a trained police dog into mission mode? The handler moved without hurry, but with absolute authority, stepping forward until his body became a barrier between the mother and the space the dog had claimed, his boots finding traction on wet brick as if the plaza itself knew to hold still. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and even, clipped to cut through panic rather than feed it. "I need you to stop moving. Hands where I can see them. Everyone else, give us room." His palm went down behind him, fingers spread in a universal signal, and the little girl, trembling but upright, instinctively backed into the shelter of his leg, her small hand clutching the fabric of his pants as if it were the sturdiest thing she'd ever known. He felt her breath hitch against his knee and matched his own breathing to something slow and deliberate, the way he'd been trained to anchor chaos by refusing to mirror it. The K9 released the jacket and immediately repositioned, planting itself squarely between the handler and the mother. Paws wide, shoulders lowered, a low growl rolling out of its chest. Not loud, not feral, but measured, professional. A sound that said there was a line here now, and crossing it would be a mistake. The dog's eyes never left the mother's coat and the bag pressed to her side, its gaze unwavering, ears forward like radar dishes tuned to a frequency no one else could hear. The crowd faltered, a collective step backward rippling out as phones hovered uncertainly and murmurs rose, the word "why" passing from mouth to mouth like a dropped coin no one dared pick up. The mother's hands hovered, torn between reaching for her child and clutching the tote higher against her ribs, her face a mess of fear and outrage, eyes darting to the dog, then to the handler, then to the ring of strangers suddenly staring. "You're hurting her," she cried. Though the girl was untouched now, shielded, the handler's knee solid at her back. "Please," the handler replied, still calm, still precise. "She's safe. I need you to set the bag down. Slowly." His eyes flicked once to the K9, a silent check-in, and the dog answered by shifting its weight, tightening the invisible perimeter it was guarding. Somewhere close, too close, a faint electronic chirp sounded again, almost apologetic, like a device trying not to be noticed. The K9's growl deepened by a degree so small only the handler caught it, and the girl felt the vibration through the handler's leg as much as she heard it. The mother froze, breath catching, and in that suspended moment, the chirp cut off abruptly, silence snapping shut around it like a trap. The handler's jaw tightened. He adjusted his stance so the girl was fully behind him now, his calf a wall, his free hand ready, his other steady on the leash that no longer needed correction. "Do not move," he said, not louder, just firmer, the words carrying the weight of procedure and promise. The plaza felt suddenly narrower, the blinking lights too bright, the air thick with sugar and rain, and something sharper underneath that made the back of the handler's throat prickle. The K9 held its ground, eyes locked, body a living warning sign, guarding a boundary drawn by scent and sound rather than chalk. No one could see the line. No one but the dog seemed to know exactly where it was. And as the last echo of the chirp died and the mother's bag remained pressed tight against her side, the handler understood that whatever had triggered this moment hadn't passed. It had just gone quiet. The siren never sounded. But the arrival had the same effect as one, a subtle shift in attention as a uniformed local security official pushed through the thinning ring of bystanders with an easy gait and a smile that belonged at a bake sale, not the center of a frozen plaza. He was well known, too well known, gray at the temples, jacket zipped halfway, hands open and relaxed as if he were there to calm a nervous crowd rather than step into a live situation. All right, he said, voice warm and folksy, clapping once as though to reset the mood. "Let's all take a breath here." His eyes flicked to the K9, then to the handler, and the smile widened just enough to show teeth. "Looks like your dog got a little excited," he added lightly. "Happens. Loud plaza, lots of smells. Just a misunderstanding." A few people nodded, grateful for an explanation that didn't demand anything from them. The official stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a friendly secret. "No need to scare folks," he murmured. "We've got families out here. Holidays just wrapped. Let's keep this calm." He gestured vaguely toward the crowd, then toward the handler's leash hand. "Why don't you pull your dog back, give the girl to her mom, and we'll all get on with our day." The handler didn't move. He felt the little girl's fingers tighten against his pant leg and shifted his weight to keep her shielded, his eyes never leaving the official's face. The K9's growl didn't rise, but it didn't fade either, a steady vibration that made the air between them hum. "Sir," the handler replied evenly, "my dog did not overreact." The official chuckled softly, shaking his head as if indulging a younger man's pride. "Come on," he said, still smiling, though something harder glinted behind his eyes. "We don't need reports. We don't need phones out. You know how rumors start. Let's clear this before it turns into something it's not." He leaned in closer, voice dropping further. "I'll take responsibility. You did your job. Now let me do mine." The handler's gaze slid, just for a moment, to the mother still clutching her bag, to the way her shoulders were locked high and her eyes flicked toward the exits. Not her child. He thought of the faint chirp that had cut out too cleanly, the dog's fixation, the way the official hadn't asked a single question about why. Around them, murmurs swelled as people sensed resolution approaching, phones lowering, tension easing. The official reached out as if to touch the handler's arm in a gesture of reassurance. The handler stepped half a pace back, subtly, keeping the girl behind him, keeping the dog's line intact. "With respect," he said, calm but firm. "This scene isn't clear." The official's smile tightened, edges fraying. "Don't make this bigger than it needs to be," he warned quietly. "Stand down." In that instant, the handler understood the pressure wasn't about safety or panic control. It was about speed, about erasing a moment before it left a mark. The help had arrived too fast, too smooth, with answers already packaged. As the canine's growl deepened by another fraction, and the official's eyes flicked toward the mother's bag with something like calculation, the handler realized the most dangerous thing in the plaza wasn't the noise or the crowd. It was the insistence that nothing was wrong. The plaza didn't calm the way the official wanted it to, not completely, because truth has a way of slipping through fingers when it's already been recorded. Even as a few people lowered their phones, one teenager in a rain-speckled hoodie kept his camera steady, elbows braced, lens trained on the handler's face and the dog's rigid posture. The clip captured everything the crowd would argue about later. The K9's precise grip on the girl's jacket, the way it never once snapped its skin, the handler's palm-down signal, the mother's scream, and most importantly, a moment that lasted less than a second. When the handler had said the word inspection, the mother had flinched, not like a startled parent, but like someone who'd just heard a code word. Her shoulders had jumped, her eyes had darted, and her hand had tightened around the tote strap so hard the leather creased. The teenager's mic even picked up the faint electronic chirp that followed, a tiny, clipped sound that didn't belong in a holiday plaza. In real time, people only felt their unease. On video, they could rewind it, replay it, freeze frame the mother's expression and the dog's locked stare until the story changed from overreacting K9 to what did that dog detect? The handler felt the shift before he saw it. Murmurs sharpening into questions. Bystanders glancing at one another with the same dawning suspicion. The compromised official kept talking, smiling, waving his hands like he could swat away the moment. But the handler didn't let the noise pull him off task. He kept his breathing slow, his voice quiet, his attention narrowed to what the dog was telling him with its body. The canine's nose kept drawing toward the mother's side, not her face, not her hands. Toward the area where the tote pressed into her coat, and toward the stroller parked a few feet away, half hidden behind a display of knitted scarves. The stroller looked ordinary. Faded fabric, a small blanket folded neatly, a stuffed animal clipped to the handle. But the dog's ears stayed forward, its gaze fixed in that direction, as if the stroller were a doorway. The handler made a decision without announcing it. "Sweetheart," he murmured to the little girl, keeping his tone warm so the crowd wouldn't hear the steel underneath. "Stay right here behind me, okay? Hold my pant leg. Don't let go." She nodded, eyes huge, lips pressed tight, doing exactly as told. Then the handler shifted his stance, using his body and the K9's planted position to create a momentary blind spot from the official's line of sight. He moved like he was simply adjusting for space. But in that subtle step, he got close enough to the stroller to see what the dog was smelling. Near one of the wheels, tucked where fabric met metal, something small glinted under the gray light, too clean, too deliberate to be random. A tiny plastic puck, no bigger than a coin, with a sliver of adhesive and a pinhole opening like a breathing pore. The kind of thing most people would mistake for a toy part. The kind of thing that could chirp. The handler didn't grab it barehanded. He pulled a pair of gloves from his pocket with practiced economy, slipped them on, and with 2 fingers peeled the puck away from the stroller frame. The K9's growl eased. Not because danger was gone, but because the dog had watched a threat move from hidden to controlled. The handler kept the object low, palm closed around it, and let the crowd see only his calm. The mother's eyes snapped to his hand, and for the first time her composure cracked into something like fear of being caught rather than fear for her child. The official noticed the motion a beat later and stepped forward sharply. "Hey, what are you doing?" he demanded, the folksy smile gone for a flash before he forced it back on. But it was too late. The video was still rolling. The crowd had seen the handler glove up, and the handler, feeling the faint vibration of the little puck against his palm like a trapped insect, understood the stakes with cold clarity. This wasn't a dog misreading smells in a busy plaza. This was equipment. This was placement. This was intent. This wasn't random. Someone had chosen that mother, that child, that moment. It was targeted. By the time the drizzle dried on the plaza bricks, the video had already slipped loose of the official's smile and sprinted through the town like a match in dry grass, and in a back room 2 miles away, warm, carpeted, insulated from weather and consequence, a polished man watched it with the kind of fury that never raises its voice. The room was dressed to look harmless. Mahogany table, framed photos of ribbon cuttings, a tasteful lamp throwing honey-colored light across a wall of community awards. The man at the head of the table wore a crisp button-down and a charity pin on his lapel, the kind of figure people called a pillar, the kind who shook hands at fundraisers and spoke about opportunity with careful, camera-ready sincerity. But the way he held the phone, knuckles tight, jaw locked, gave him away. On the screen, the K9's body language played again. The stillness, the ears forward, the controlled grip on the little girl's jacket, the handler's palm-down command, and then the close-up. Gloved fingers peeling a tiny puck from the stroller frame. The man didn't flinch at the mother's scream or the child's fear. He flinched at the glove, at the object. At the moment, the crowd's murmurs turned into questions. "Idiots," he hissed. The word quiet but venomous, as if the entire town had personally embarrassed him. A second person sat nearby in the shadows. Someone with a tablet open, scrolling quickly, watching the view count climb as comments poured in, each one a fresh spark. Police dog saved her. What was that device? Why did the mom flinch? Small town cover-up. The polished man's expression tightened, as though he could squeeze the internet back into the bottle with sheer will. "This was supposed to be clean," he said, voice level. The kind of calm that lived on top of something ruthless. Routine, ordinary. Another file closed before anyone noticed it existed. He tapped the screen where the mother's bag pressed against her side. "We gave her a path. We gave her an agreement. She was supposed to do her part." The person with the tablet swallowed. "The handler," they began. "The handler is the problem," the man cut in. "He's trained, he's stubborn, and he brought a dog that listens to chemistry, not politics." He stood and paced once, slow, controlled, eyes flicking to a whiteboard half hidden behind a cabinet. It wasn't labeled like a conspiracy board would be in movies. It was labeled like a schedule. Appointments, transfers, welfare check, custody assistance, protective relocation. soft words, gentle wrappers, a pipeline of quiet removals dressed in paperwork and polite urgency, a system designed to make people disappear without anyone calling it what it was. The polished man stopped at the window, looking down at the town lights, the plaza somewhere out there beneath the gray sky. And his reflection stared back, smiling, acceptable, untouchable. "We don't lose assets," he said, the sentence landing like a rule older than him. Not to a dog, and not to a crowd with phones. He turned, and the person with the tablet set it down as if it had become dangerous to hold. "What do you want done?" they asked. The man didn't answer immediately. He watched the clip once more, pausing at the exact frame where the handler's glove closed around the little puck. "That device wasn't supposed to be visible," he said softly. "It was supposed to chirp once, confirm location, and then go quiet. Now it's evidence." He slid the phone across the table and leaned in, charity pin catching the light like a badge of virtue. "Contain the narrative," he ordered, voice still calm, eyes cold. "Make the handler look unstable. Make the dog look dangerous. Give the town something to hate that isn't us." He straightened, smoothing his cuffs as if preparing for a meeting instead of a takedown. "And reclaim what belongs to us," he added, each word precise. "Silence the handler, and retrieve the asset before he figures out what he's holding." The handler didn't take the mother's protests or the official's smiles at face value after that. Not when the little puck sat sealed in an evidence pouch and the canine kept angling its body between the child and everyone else like the plaza had suddenly become a minefield. He made a call that skipped the usual chain, spoke in low, coded language to someone he trusted outside the town's cozy circles. And then he did the most important thing a protector can do. He moved the vulnerable piece off the board before the other side could close its fist. He brought the little girl to a modest, unmarked place on the edge of town, a safe house owned by a retired dispatcher who asked no questions and offered hot tea. Like kindness was procedure, and the canine stayed glued to the child as if its heartbeat had become her perimeter. Wherever she sat, the dog settled near her feet. Whenever she shifted, the dog's ears tracked the room. When she finally started to cry in quiet little bursts, she tried to swallow. The canine rested its chin on the rug and simply watched the door, a living alarm system that never needed batteries. Outside, the sky went from gray to ink, and the air inside the house felt heavier by the hour. Not because of anything visible, but because the handler could feel attention pressing in from the dark like fog. By dusk, the social media clip had ballooned beyond the plaza. Local pages, then regional feeds, until the story turned into a tug of war between people demanding answers and people insisting it was just a misunderstanding. And the handler watched the comments shift in real time, watched new accounts appear to push the same phrases like they were reading from a script. Dangerous dog, reckless cop, traumatized child, hysterical crowd. It wasn't organic. It was a counter move. He stepped outside twice to scan the street, and both times he saw the same dark sedan rolling slow past the corner, windows tinted, headlights off until the last second. Like a predator that didn't want to be noticed, but wanted him to notice anyway. When he changed position to a different window, the sedan returned 10 minutes later, and a second car joined it. An older SUV with a dented rear bumper that idled too smoothly for its age. The handler's stomach tightened, that familiar mission mode chill crawling up the back of his neck. He checked the locks. He checked his phone's signal. He checked the evidence pouch again, like touching it could keep the truth from being stolen. The retired dispatcher tried to keep the girl calm with cartoons turned low and a blanket that smelled like laundry soap. But even the child sensed the shift. Her eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the curtains that moved when the heater kicked on, to the dog that refused to relax. Around 11:47 p.m., the knock came. 3 taps, polite, almost neighborly, and wrong precisely because of how polite it sounded. The handler didn't answer. He didn't even breathe for a second. The K9 rose in one silent motion, body stiff, head angled toward the front door, and a low, warning rumble rolled out of its chest like distant thunder. The girl clutched the blanket and stared at the handler's face, reading it the way kids read adults when they know something is being hidden for their sake. Another knock followed, firmer. A voice called through the door, sweet as syrup. "Just making sure everyone's okay in there." The handler recognized the tactic, welfare check language, the same soft wrapper he'd seen used to move people without alarms, and he felt the line between safety and trap thin to a thread. He guided the girl back deeper into the house with a single palm-down gesture, whispered for her to stay behind the couch, and kept the K9 close, hand on the harness, controlling the dog's power without smothering its warning. He moved to the side window and pulled the curtain back a tiny fraction. Streetlight shimmered on wet pavement. And then he saw it. A tiny glint from across the street, high and steady, like a camera lens catching light for half a heartbeat before shifting away. His pulse didn't spike. His focus did. They weren't just here. They were watching. The door chime inside the house suddenly jingled as the wind nudged the back entry, a small, innocent sound that snapped through the tension like a gunshot. And in that instant, the handler realized the worst part wasn't the cars or the knock or the voices pretending to be helpful. It was the pattern, the timing, the way every move he made was answered too quickly. He hadn't just been found. He'd been followed from the plaza, step by step, and whoever was outside had come not to ask questions, but to take back what the K9 had pulled out of the dark. Just after midnight, when the last car finally drifted away from the curb like a shark slipping back into deep water, the handler kept the house dim and quiet, listening to rain tick the gutters and to the K9's steady breathing as it stood watch. The dog stayed squared to the front door like a sentry, not barking, just tracking the world with ears that twitched at every distant engine, every faint footstep that didn't belong. The little girl in the blue sweater lay behind the couch with the blanket pulled to her chin, eyes wide, trying to be brave because the adults were trying to be brave. And she could feel the fear, even when no one said the word. At 1:23 a.m., a sound came from the back porch. Not a knock this time, but a careful scrape, like someone setting something down and then thinking better of it. The K9's head snapped toward the kitchen, body going from statue to coiled power in a heartbeat, and the handler raised one palm to the air for stillness, his other hand tightening on the dog's harness. Then the back doorbell chimed once. Soft, polite, almost apologetic. And that single note felt louder than the earlier pounding because it carried intention. The handler didn't open the door. He moved to the side window, lifted the curtain by 2 fingers, and saw a figure standing under the porch light with both hands visible, shoulders slumped. No car idling nearby. No partner in the shadows. The person looked local services, reflective jacket half-zipped, hair damp, face pale enough to glow. The K9 didn't explode. It watched, growl low, as if measuring honesty by scent. The handler cracked the door only as wide as the chain would allow. "State your name," he said, voice flat, procedural. The figure swallowed hard. I'm with community outreach," they whispered, eyes glassy, words shaking. "I shouldn't be here. I know I shouldn't. But I can't sleep. Not after the plaza." The handler didn't soften, but he didn't slam the door either. "Why are you here?" The person's hands trembled as they raised a small, sealed envelope and a thumb-sized drive wrapped in plastic. "Because you're holding the wrong piece," they said, voice cracking. "And they're going to kill your career to get it back." The canine's ears tipped forward, not aggressive, alert. The handler studied the figure's face, looking for the slick confidence of a setup. But what he saw instead was moral collapse. Red-rimmed eyes, a jaw clenched like it hurt. The look of someone who'd been carrying a secret until it started poisoning them. He unlatched the chain and pulled the door open enough to usher them inside fast, away from windows, away from the street's line of sight. The ally stepped in and immediately looked toward the living room as if expecting judgment from the child, then flinched when the little girl shifted under the blanket. "I'm sorry," the ally breathed, tears gathering. "I'm so sorry." The handler kept them near the kitchen table, phone in one hand, gloves in the other. "Talk," he said. The ally nodded, swallowing again and again like their throat was closing. "They call it relocation," they confessed. "Routine welfare interventions, custody support, protective transfers, paperwork that looks clean. But it's a pipeline, quiet removals, people who won't be missed fast enough." They slid the sealed drive across the table. "This is the log, pickup times, case numbers, supervisor initials, and the mother." The handler's eyes hardened. "She's in on it?" The allies shook their head violently. "Not like you think. She's trapped." Their voice dropped to a whisper. "They coerced her. Debt, threats, something from her past. She didn't choose this. They're using her as cover because a tired mom with a child doesn't look like a smuggling route." The allies' gaze flicked toward the living room again, grief twisting their mouth. "And the girl is the leverage. Every time the mother hesitates, they remind her what they can do to her daughter." The K9 let out a single, deeper rumble, less anger than confirmation, and the handler felt the story reframe in his bones. The plaza wasn't a dog attacking a family. It was a dog breaking a chain. He reached for the drive, careful, deliberate, and as his gloved fingers closed around the plastic, the ally added the detail that made the air go colder. "If they can't reclaim the asset tonight, they'll stage it tomorrow in daylight. Some official-looking removal, and they'll make the whole town clap while they do it." The handler didn't argue with the allies' fear or try to soothe it with empty assurances. He moved the way he always did when the world turned sharp. Fast, quiet, and procedural. Because in moments like this, kindness looked like competence. He photographed the sealed drive, the envelope, the allies' ID badge, and the evidence puck from the stroller. Then placed everything into separate bags with gloved hands, labeling each one like it might be challenged in court by someone smiling in a suit. He made the call that local people hated, the call that bypassed familiar faces and folksy favors. Dialing a state-level contact he'd worked with years earlier during a joint operation, then immediately calling internal affairs with a concise, clipped report. Suspected compromised local chain, surveillance device recovered, whistleblower present, child at risk, removal pipeline indicated by logs. He didn't use dramatic words. He used the words that trigger action. Imminent threat, evidence secured, witness willing, potential obstruction. Within the hour, the temperature in the house seemed to change, as if the air itself sensed a higher authority drawing near. And by dawn, the street outside filled not with circling sedans, but with unmarked units that parked with purpose. No idle intimidation, just quiet control. The K9 stayed at the girl's side while the handler took a statement from the ally, recording every detail. And when the little girl finally fell into an exhausted sleep, cheek pressed to the blanket, The dog settled near her feet like a warm, vigilant wall. At 7:18 a.m., the first domino fell. The compromised official who had tried to minimize the plaza incident was approached at his office by agents who didn't smile, who didn't ask politely, who simply presented a warrant and watched his folksy veneer crumble into sweat. At 7:43, another domino. A community services supervisor, escorted out past coworkers who stared at their keyboards as if staring could make them innocent. At 8:05, a third. The dark sedan's registered owner, detained during a traffic stop that looked routine to anyone driving by. Except for the way officers moved with coordinated precision and the way the driver's hands shook when asked about a location chirp. By mid-morning, the polished community leader, the man with the charity pin and the framed photos, walked into what he thought was a scheduled meeting and found a room full of people who didn't care about his reputation. He opened his mouth to explain, to charm, to control the narrative. And then the sealed drive's contents hit the table. The log of relocations, the initials, the pickup times, the coded language that made cruelty look like care. His face tightened, not with remorse, but with the realization he'd been outmaneuvered by a dog and a handler who refused to stand down. Arrests rolled outward like a chain reaction, each one exposing another layer, each one forcing another confession, until the hidden structure that had pressed on the town for years finally cracked under the weight of its own paperwork. The Plaza video, once framed as a dangerous dog incident, turned into evidence of heroism as investigators matched the faint chirp on the recording to the recovered tracking puck, confirming it had been actively transmitting near the mother's belongings at the exact moment the K9 intervened. The handler's calm commands weren't reckless. They were life-saving. The K9's drag wasn't aggression. It was extraction, pulling a child away from the epicenter of an imminent operation before the pipeline could close around her. And the mother, when located and separated from the people controlling her, didn't fight like a villain. She collapsed like someone whose leash had finally been cut, admitting through tears that she'd been threatened, that they'd promised her debt forgiveness and safety if she cooperated, then held her daughter's future like a blade against her throat. Days later, the town gathered again in the same plaza. But the atmosphere had changed. Lighter in the sunlight, raw in the eyes of people who realized how close they'd been to applauding a lie. The fountain splashed, the holiday lights still blinked, and the bakery's warm smell returned like a gentle apology. The little girl, now wrapped in a clean coat with her blue sweater bright beneath it, stood beside a caseworker who looked genuinely protective. And when the handler knelt to her height, she hesitated only a second before stepping forward and pressing both hands into the K9's thick fur. The dog leaned in, calm and steady, tail thumping once against the wet bricks, and the girl let out a shaky laugh that sounded like relief learning how to breathe. People didn't cheer loudly. They clapped quietly, some with tears, some with heads bowed, as if the town itself was trying to repair its own moral spine. The handler didn't bask in it. He checked the perimeter out of habit, eyes scanning windows, then softened when he saw the girl's small fingers curled in the dog's harness strap like it was a lifeline. Trust, once broken, doesn't come back with speeches. It comes back with proof, with protection, with days that end safely. As the crowd began to disperse and the plaza returned to ordinary motion, the K9 suddenly paused near the fountain, nose lifting, ears angling toward a trash bin by the bench. The same bench the mother had stood beside that day. The handler followed the dog's gaze and felt a familiar chill. Not fear this time, but curiosity sharpened by experience, because the dog wasn't celebrating. It was searching. And as its eyes fixed on something small and metallic tucked where no one would normally look, the handler realized there was one detail nobody had asked about yet. The first thing the canine noticed, before the chirp, before the tracking puck, before the crowd even knew there was danger, was something else entirely. Something that suggested the pipeline hadn't been built by amateurs, and that someone, somewhere, had planned for the day the dog came too close.